Good evening and welcome to another edition of Conservative Corner. I am your host, Tom Mountain. We are a monthly talk show based here in Newton at the New TV studios, and we focus on the issues of the day surrounding Newton, the state, and sometimes on a national level, based on or based from the conservative perspective. And this is certainly a perspective that you wouldn't exactly get on a daily basis in the media here in Newton and certainly in the state in general. We have a myriad of issues that we cover, and specific to Newton, there is one very hot issue that we are covering now, and I would term this a special edition of Conservative Corner because we are focusing on the upcoming override, and this override will be, there's three of them actually, it will be on March 17th, and because of that, we have with us here tonight a very important guest, and that guest is Dr. Randy Bach, who is the president of the Newton Taxpayers Association. The Newton Taxpayers Association is one of the oldest taxpayers associations in the Commonwealth. It was founded many years ago, several decades ago, by the likes of Sam Robbins, Arnold Garrison, Al Mandel, and assorted others who were at the time instrumental in the early 80s in formulating Proposition 2.5. Now, what is Proposition 2.5? Well, that is something which has saved the average Newton taxpayer tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, in their income over the past few decades. That simply meant and means that there's a cap yearly on the rate at which any municipality, Newton and beyond, can charge its resident homeowners for taxes, for property taxes. So it's limited to 2.5. Prior to that, that was completely out of control, which is why we have a property tax of 2.5% mandate. And in order to go beyond that, you have to go to the voters of the community, in this case Newton, to get what's called an override anytime that you want to assess the Newton public anything more than that. The success or failure of the override will determine whether or not your taxes will go up for a limited or sometimes an unlimited period of time. And because of that, about every decade or so, sometimes less, Newton will have a override proposal. And because of that, we in the Newton Republican Party and the Newton Taxpayers Association will routinely fight against that and inform the public as to why they should vote against it. And that's why we're here tonight with Dr. Randy Bach. Randy, thank you so much for being here. And it's certainly a privilege. And I've worked with you and known you for a very long time. And I'm glad, A, that you're spearheading this campaign against the override. And B, that you are certainly in a very prestigious position where your predecessors had run the Newton taxpayers with the names that I mentioned, and you're certainly in good company. And the Newton Taxpayers is an organization that is very well respected, not only in the city level, but on the statewide level. So please, if you could give us some of the background of this Newton tax override that they're implementing.
Okay, so I just thank you, Tom, for the generous introduction, and thank you, viewers at home. I just want to stipulate one thing, that there's a group actually spearheading the movement called No Override Newton. And so the signs you see are actually from that group. So that's, the Newton Taxpayers Association, as you well note, was the spearhead behind Proposition 2.5, which has kept a cap on what cities can, decide extra per year to tax on previous, cumulatively. So it changes a little bit based on assessment values and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, there's a group that I, commend people to look at called No Override Newton. And they have a web page. There's also a Yes Override Newton, so you can go look at that as well and compare and contrast. So I recommend people seek that group out and donate and so forth. One of the financial analysts who's been part of that project and previously with Newton Taxpayers has pointed out that the increase from the override for the median home sold in Newton is currently $1.2 million. This override may not seem that it'll come out to a certain number of hundreds of dollars per year, but over the course of the next 15 years, something like that, this will keep increasing, because whatever, it's kind of like the miracle of compound interest. So if you get this extra nudge over the 2.5% cap, that amount becomes your new basis upon which to generate new percentages above. And so I have a spreadsheet here. It's a little bit complicated, but it totals out to about, I think, $17,000 over the next 15 years extra, because you've...
And that is the average homeowner?
Yes,
the average
for the
property.
median home price.
I see.
So not everybody owns a home. Some people rent. Some people, I guess, just work in Newton commercially. So that, but this override, I think, affects both residential and commercial.
It does.
And there are actually 3 overrides. 2 are debt exclusions just for the schools. I don't want to go too far in the weeds. Those don't necessarily have the cap. They're not necessarily going to raise your ceiling or raise the roof upon which the new increases are going to go. So, even if you have some specific questions, I'm happy to address those. But I just want to maybe frame the issue as I see
Please.
it, and as our group sees it. And I believe, and I want to speak for them per se, but as no override Newton sees it, which is that it is, well, we have something here, Newton's disingenuous overrides. I'm not the author of that statement, but I think it is kind of a systemic problem. I'm not sure it's disingenuous because we vote for the same people all the time, and they've been doing the same thing not for a little bit of time, but for a lot of time, and that is increasing basically the school budget. Now, it's important to have schools. My kids went to Newton Public Schools. We love the schools, all that kind of stuff. But the question is whether you can do it appropriately and have it right-sized for your populace. So the schools were not horrible in 1992, and arguably they tracked at a better place vis-a-vis other cities, comparable towns, wealthier suburbs in the Massachusetts area. And so at that time, in 1992, the school budget comprised, I think in the high 40s, about I think maybe 45 to 46% of the entire budget. This fraction of the budget, so that the city collected taxes, people paid taxes very similar as we do now, but that percentage of how much of the budget comprised of schools has gone up into the 60s. And I actually have a slide here.
You mean 60% and
Yes,
over.
percent. And so I will maybe try to pop this in after the fact, but it's a little bit hard to see here. But I did make a slide earlier showing how this number has gone up from the, I guess, low 40s in 1992. It's gone up to, I apologize, it's gone up, let's see, a little bit above 60, about 61%, and above, higher at different times of the budget. And 80% of that is teachers. So what we're talking about is basically a school problem, a teacher problem, a union problem, and that's the part of the budget. My expression is it's an elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about it. But basically, you started with maybe kind of a teenage elephant, or baby elephant, and the elephant's just getting bigger. So you're either going to have to figure out a way to expand the room, or a way to kind of make sense of that and right size it. You can't necessarily do that much because of union constraints and union contracts. You can't necessarily do that much with the teacher salary per se, but you can have the volume and the number of teachers, the number of ancillary staff coincide with what our financial abilities are.
Randy, it's interesting. After the COVID shutdown, when all the schools, public schools within Newton were shut down, despite the fact that all the parochial and private schools were open for business, were open for the students, when the students were finally came back to school, when they were reopened in September of 2021, at least 1,000 students left the system. Not only that, but 9 to 10 kindergarten classes had to be canceled because residents lost their faith in the Newton Public Schools because of the shutdown. So people are continuously, right to this day, taking their kids or not out of the Newton schools or not enrolling them in the schools. Now, and the school population has gone down precipitously. Not only that, but to the point where there is talk about the school department eliminating one elementary school within the system. So my question is very basic. We have a system where the school enrollment, the population, is decreasing and is projected to decrease. Yet the teachers' unions still want more money. So in other words, you have a company where the personnel have gone down, but they still want more
Right.
money. It makes absolutely no sense fiscally and otherwise. And one of the ploys that they always use is class size, as if, you know, if they have 22 or 23 students in the classroom, things will go terrible and the kids won't learn and they'll become illiterate and not be able to do math in 8th grade. But, you know, you and I are from the same general generation, as are the leaders in Newton, in that we went to school in the 60s and 70s. Now, I'm sure that you can recall, as can I, when classrooms of 36 students was the norm. It was typical.
Yeah, I went to public school in New York City, home of the Yankees. I grew up in the Bronx. It's actually a side story. You know, it's a big Fisher because my kids, you know, went to Red Sox games. And my brother's like, "Arr." Anyway, total side story. But I was in New York City and in public school growing up till 7th grade, and I did some services for the principal because I helped organize some of the kids for the assembly and whatnot. So I was in and out. At the offices, the school office at that time had a principal, assistant principal, a school nurse, and maybe a secretary.
And a janitor.
And a janitor,
That
but
was it.
I didn't see him on a regular basis. And every class had a teacher, and there were 30 kids in every class. I've got pictures to prove it.
Yes.
And now, if you look at the masthead of a school, just go to any, go to any of the schools Newton.ma, et cetera, and just look at the masthead. I'm not saying all of them are full-time, but there's a huge masthead, and the number of teachers do not constitute a plurality or majority of the number of staff at any given school, from my recollection. And so even if it's a 50-50 thing, there's just a lot of extra services. Now, if people want that, well, fine. Vote for it and keep going, and you can keep paying more for it. And there is kind of a different experience about schools. There's occupational therapy, there's therapy. There's ESL. There's all kinds of
English
kind of
second language, yes.
special education. There's a lot of stuff going on in the schools. I understand that, but what has happened is it has not kept pace with what the city collects. The city can't print money. It's not the United States government. They can't just print Newton dollars and so forth. But you're absolutely right about this one particular point, which is that the Newton school enrollment. Maybe it's going to be a little bit tricky to see. Maybe if I get the other thing, Newton school enrollment has gone down precipitously. That's that big red blob on the side. And what has happened is that Newton was not actually increasing that much in general. This is kind of a blow up, but we went down a lot in the last 2 years. And so,
You're talking about school enrollment.
School enrollment,
Yes.
yes. So, school enrollment has gone down enough that ostensibly they could mothball a school. I mean, they're talking about renovating the schools. I'm not going to leave that aside. People can vote for that one way or another. That's a separate override. But they could, a lot of the time, this is to kind of advance the scheduled renovation of these schools. With the second and third override, these renovations would happen in due pace, in due course of time. But the second and third overrides, the debt exclusion ones for Countryside and Franklin, are just kind of precessing. They're bringing the arrival date of those renovations sooner than later. They were scheduled to go in maybe 2029, and instead it'll be 2025 or 2027. And so what people are doing they're hurrying up the renovation of these schools, when if they wanted to, they could just wait till 2029, but in the meanwhile, potentially mothball, kind of redistrict some of the kids, and they would do what they would do anyway if one of the schools was being renovated, have the kids go someplace else, and they could cut down the number of teachers at the same time proportionally. And so, Google, when Google, I think, laid off 20% of its work staff in the last quarter, and other companies do the same exact thing. When their product is having trouble in the market, they drop employment. Newton has not done that, has not done that with the teachers, and there were plans to do that. It was discussed in the Boston Globe a year ago. They knew this. They knew there were going to be shortfalls, and they talked about cutting 74 from the.
But
school
Randy,
budget.
also the overhead in Newton, the bureaucrats who run the school system. I'm not sure how many there are now, but I do recall when I was a full-time columnist, a weekly columnist in the Newton Tab, the first time before I got kicked out, in around 2009. I used to write a yearly summary of the salaries of the bureaucrats, the curriculum coordinators, the principals, and how much they make, and how many there were who made over $100,000. Now, as I recall, there were, say, between 20 and 25 when I stopped writing about it, when I left the first time from the tab in 2008. And again, that was, 15 years ago. Now, I've been told that it's triple that number that make over $100,000. And we're talking about people like curriculum coordinators, which means a fine arts coordinator, English coordinator, math coordinator. And my question then, as of now, is what do these people do all day to earn such exorbitant salaries?
Well,
Seriously.
Well, Mark Stein, the pundit, the TV pundit, Mark Stein, S-T-E-Y-N, he once said about General Motors, he said, it's a hugely successful UAW pension funder with a money-losing automotive division. So his point there was that GM is kind of a transfer funding towards the union, but the actual product suffered. So General Motors, has gone through some change. It's still there, I guess. It got bailed out, whatnot. But the actual product has not been up to snuff. It didn't measure up to Toyota and all that. And people voted with their wallets away from General Motors. Our schools, this moment in time with COVID, people voted with their wallets. They voted with their children. They voted with their ideals, and they voted away from Newton schools. And I think there has to be some soul searching, and in the meanwhile, some budget cutting about that. And if they want to present a different and better product, and people come back and they're flooding the system, then we can talk about all these kind of things.
The school committee itself commissioned a survey among the school parents, and the survey basically was asking, how are we doing in the school department? And the survey came back and said it was about 70% of the respondents said that the schools are heading in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
Now, when that came out, some school committee members dismissed it as not indicative of the true feelings of parents. Well, they commissioned the survey,
Yeah, no, I get it.
and they don't like the results, so as a result, they sought to
I know. And they're going to denigrate it and demote it and all that kind of stuff. But in point of fact, the real number, the thing that's indisputable is that people have voted with their wallets and with their feet. And these are people who are getting, basically, once you pay taxes, once you live here, so they're getting the schools for free. Now, I know free is kind of a loaded term, but basically they've already paid. It's a sunk cost. So there were times when my kids were dissatisfied with the Newton schools, we thought about taking the kids out at different times, and to go to private school. And we had trouble. Anyway, it didn't work out that way. But we would have had to spend extra on top of all our taxes and all that kind of stuff, 30, 50, 60,000, whatever the number is, tens of thousands of dollars per kid to send those kids out. So, at this rate, I think it was 1,000 drop in the tuition. So they're talking about 1,000 people at, say, 40,000 a head. What does that come out to? Is that $40 million that people are spending to be outside of Newton? That's incredible. And that's when the main product of Newton city government, the majority of the budget goes towards schools, and the product is school education, and people are taking their kids out at the cost of free and another $30,000, $40,000 out of their pocket to bring them someplace else. That's a huge indictment, and I think at the very least, before we start granting the reward for this failure, we should investigate it and have people be held accountable. And again, my plan has been for everyone, even if they're in favor of all the overrides, and it's my kids in the school, I want the schools to do well, whatever, even if you're in favor of it, to postpone your being in favor and vote no now, and give people the chance in the city to present why this has to be and how they can do no cost cutting and so forth, and or where they can present a better school product and bring these kids back.
Randy, one thing that really I think is very glaring and is an annoyance to me and to many residents of the city is that during the COVID shutdown, again, all the public schools were shut down in the city of Newton. Yet, for example, Bigelow Middle School was shut down right around the corner. Mount Alvernia and Newton Country Day were open. In your part of town, Day Middle School was closed. Fessenden across Albemarle Field was open. Newton South High was closed. Catholic Memorial right up the road was open. So the school department, the school committee has never really offered an explanation and or an apology to really justify why that happened. And they expect us to come back and give them more money when they kept our kids out of school for a year and a half.
Right, I agree. And and I maintain this, that if it had been the zombie apocalypse, with anthrax mixed in the air and nuclear radiation, then they did exactly the right thing. But it's weird, and that side by side, people are you're believing in zombies and you're keeping your kids in and schools are shut down, and yet these people are walking to school, Catholic schools and so forth. I met a delightful young woman who had been working in a public school system. I live in Boston, and I met her at one of the American Legion events, and she's effervescent, and you should have her on our show, on your show, better guest than me. And she said, yeah, no, I couldn't stand just being at home. I love teaching children. And so I went, and I'm not going to name her or the school, but she went to a Catholic school, I believe in Wellesley, or Weston, or one place around here. It could have been Wayland. Anyway, she decided to go at a lower salary than she had been getting because she likes teaching, and she just didn't see any sense in sitting at home for this time. And her kids came. Did they drop dead? No. Did they get sick? Literally through the United States, for healthy children, there are kids with lymphomas and leukemia, I get it, and kids on chemotherapy, there's kids morbidly obese, so forth. But for kids who are healthy in the United States, there were literally a total of 0 COVID mortalities. And this is something that should have been investigated and looked at. And there were places on Earth where it was happening in real time, in Europe, in Sweden, and so forth, where the schools were open and the teachers were not dropping dead. The kids were not dropping. There was no increase in passage of COVID to the populace and so forth. They did they did much better than their neighbors. Initially, there were some, bumps because they kind of took the natural immunity approach. So they had an initial bump, but after that, their society did better. They didn't have the huge own goal of wasting the economy, closing everything down, and the social stressors and decay that we've seen with rioting and all kinds of weird things that happened in the interim in that COVID year. So,
Randy,
yes, I agree with you.
Randy, and the tremendous hardship that this caused students and parents, especially working parents, especially single parents who had to raise their kids. And what did they do during the COVID? They created enormous hardship. And again, I will stress that the same people who kept, this is specific to the Newton school parents, the same people who kept your kids home from school for a year and a half are now coming to you and asking for more money. It doesn't make sense. I mean, especially even though they're hoping that their core constituency of Newton school parents will go their way. I don't think they will. But also, it's not only that, but if you look at the general economic picture, inflation is at an all-time high, gas prices are at an all-time high, home heating oil. We could go through the list again and again. Go to the local grocery store and see how much the groceries have increased. And
I actually don't go to the grocery unless I have my credit rating checked first. So I'm not sure they're going to let me in.
But it's really, there's also a myth that in Newton that everyone is affluent and everybody has a six-figure salary. Well, everybody doesn't. There's a percentage of people who don't, especially senior citizens who are on a fixed income.
Right.
And those people are certainly not going to vote for these overrides. But I would also say, based on the principle of the matter, a lot of people who are so-called affluent won't vote for it also because it's the wisdom of raising people's taxes at a time of an economic downturn.
Right. And I have one other slide I prepared here. Maybe we can get it in my camera over here. So it's going to be hard for you to see, but take my word for it. This is a slide showing the absence of savings during the good years. So I'm going to close this up. During the good years, we'll call them 2010 to 2020, the average rate of inflation was 1.4%, which sounds really good today. And that's per year. And Newton's budget went up at least 2.5%, and it went up over the course of a decade. You have to compound all that, but basically it went up 20 to 30% higher than it would have if they had just stuck with the rate of inflation and with some assumed natural growth. At the time, Newton had not had any organic growth in population for that decade, so it was a pretty static picture, and the students were static, the population was static, and yet Newton kept going up and up, just the way I showed with the percentage of the budget going towards schools. This is mostly tied to salaries and negotiations that city makes with the unions. But
also, many of you people will remember from last November's election, question one. Question one was a question which basically said, It was a so-called millionaire's tax, which said that if you give us this question one, you approve it, then $1 billion will flow mostly to the schools over the next several years in Massachusetts. Now, the Mass Teachers Association spent an enormous amount of money, $23 million I heard, to get this passed. But for them, it was a wonderful investment because by spending that money, they got $1 billion, which will flow theoretically to the schools now. Right. And so they've already gotten this enormous amount of money from the taxpayers of the Commonwealth, and now they're going to the individual cities and towns to get more. Right. It's never enough from the teachers' unions.
And it's not. I agree with all that. And the funny thing is, this is a kind of again a failing business model. People have taken their kids out, and the reason they took them out during COVID was A, because the schools were closed, and B, because COVID presented this unusual window of having Zoom classes, and people got to see some of the things that were being taught in the schools.
Yes, that too.
And that's a total separate issue. We're not going to have time to address today.
But we should.
But you should go look back, because what's being taught is kind of a divisiveness and kind of a new class system that has to do with immutable characteristics, where the places people come from, the races they are, and so forth. The kids are being kind of given generational guilt over things over which they have no control. This is causing divisiveness, and it's going to lead to big structural problems and so forth. And it's I think that this is part of the equation. So overall, the schools have been they have been voted against because people who have the means, and probably even more who can't afford private schools, would have been taking their kids out. So this is a kind of a thumbs down. There's huge dissatisfaction about the schools, and they have to think about having the product change before they ask us for money. So I would, again, my recommendation is to postpone. Even if you're a thumbs up and you want to give the city all the time, that's the way you've always voted. I think you have to postpone it and put it into a general election when people can campaign on it. Your city council, your mayor, and so forth can come back and campaign. Nothing's going to happen to the city if you say no now.
Excellent. March 14th, and you would tell the people to vote?
Let's see, there's yes or no. Do what your conscience says. But I personally think that they're always withholding the things that you want because they've paid themselves the other stuff. So what I said before was you went to a prefix menu, a buffet, and you paid for the whole thing, and then you want to get dessert. It's like, oh no, dessert is extra. You've kind of been, in a sense, bait and switched. And you've already paid for all this stuff through regular tax for the roads, for the schools, all this kind of stuff, and they should have kept it within their budget and kept towards the regular rate of inflation without overspending and having it go to what? And they have not cut down the number of teachers. Even if you don't change the salary, which is, say, fixed, you have to adjust the number of teachers, the number of students who are there.
Excellent. We have to wrap it up. Thank you, Dr. Bach. I really appreciate it. Thank you, the viewers of Newton, for tuning in. Remember to get out and vote March 14th. And we will see you next month, and when the vote tally is in, and we will discuss and elaborate on that theme at that time. But again, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.